when we talk about the Ribhu Gita, right? When we talk about the Ribhu Gita and we talk about Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma in general, the question arises whether the world is real or unreal. And so you've got many different philosophies looking at this in Hinduism. So many different perspectives. You've got the Advaita Vedanta perspective, the non-dual perspective. You've got the Vaita perspective, the dualist perspective. You've got the qualified non-dualist perspective, the Vashishta Vaita perspective. And so you've got different schools that look at it in different ways. And so, for example, yoga and Sankhya would be considered dualist schools, right? A strict dualism between the self and the world around us, right? Where Advaita would look at it differently in the sense that they would say that the world is unreal, Advaita would. So we'll get into that as well. And so we have to look at two fundamental axioms when we look at this perspective, right? There are two fundamental axioms in Hinduism which explore the nature of reality like no other. Now, these axioms are Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya and Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam. Now, the first one, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, basically means Brahman alone is real, the world is an appearance. Now, keep that in mind, an appearance. Some people say an illusion, right? But it's not illusion per se. We're thinking about appearance. Now, the second one is Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam, which means Brahman alone is real. The world is also real. And so the first axiom is what mainly the Advaita Vedantins follow, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Now, this alludes to that the world is unreal to a certain extent, right? Think of the snake and rope analogy, where all that really exists is a rope, but we project onto the world and we think it is a snake. And so then we think the world is a certain way according to our conditioning. Now, this is where we got to get into the Sanskrit Maya, which I'll talk about before. Now, I'm setting all this up before we get into Bhagavan's meditation. But then when we look at Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam, this is kind of what more of the Vashishta Vaitas, the qualified non-dualists, would follow, and the Trika system in Kashmir. So the Kashmir Shaivas, they would follow this. Now, a lot of people will argue between either or, right? Because if we look at Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam, then that's where you take in everything, right? The world is also Shakti, is the energy of Shiva. So we're not saying that the world is unreal per se from the Kashmir Shaiva perspective. But if we look at it from Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, the Advaita Vedanta perspective, then some people believe that the world itself is just pure illusion, right? And I would say that this is an incorrect translation from the Sanskrit Maya, which I'll get into. But we have to think of this in the sense of measurement, which I'll talk about. But remember, it's appearance. It's the snake in the rope, which makes the illusion of the reality of duality. If we look at this, right, Shankara and also Bhagavan had some great insights in the Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Now, we're going to focus on Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya today. Brahman alone is real. The world is an appearance. We're not going to explore Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam because Bhagavan himself was an adherent of the first axiom because he was an Advaita Vedantin, right? And so here we have Shankara and Bhagavan expressing their insight into this first axiom. So Shankara said, Brahman is real, the universe is unreal, and the universe is Brahman. This is basically a word-for-word translation of Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. This gives you more context. Now, it can be confusing, right? So Bhagavan himself states, he did not stop at the second line because the third explains too. It signifies that the universe is real if perceived as the self, the Atman, and unreal if perceived apart from the self. This is really important to remember as we go further and further into these teachings, right? It's unreal when we perceive it apart from the Atman, right? But it's real when we see the Atman itself. The universe is Brahman. And so when we see the universe as Brahman and we don't see duality anymore, then the universe is real. So it's not really a debate about whether that the physical matter is an illusion per se. It's about our state of perception. And so we misperceive the world. This is the problem, right? We misperceive the world and we see only duality. We don't see Brahman itself. This is the problem, right? We don't see Brahman itself. And so what both Bhagavan and Shankara are saying here basically is simply Atman is Brahman. So the undifferentiated state of Atman is the ultimate reality of Brahman. There is no separation between you and the ultimate, but you dwell in the illusion of measurement. You live in this subjective conditioned illusion or hypnosis or collective trip, as some people refer to it. And that's the world that we live through. But it itself is an illusion, right? And so we have to remember that always Atman is Brahman. So this is what perceiving the self in everything means, in others and in yourself and in the world in general. But the problem is Maya and Jiva. So as I've said, sometimes there's an incorrect translation of Maya, right? Where Maya is really not just illusion, but we're talking about what I mentioned in Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, where the world is an appearance. Now, the appearance is due to how we measure the reality. We are measuring the reality according to our conditioning. And so this comes from the jiva, the ego persona system. As we grow as an individual, we are conditioned, and then we see the world through that conditioned lens. So the jiva is constantly measuring, which builds or constructs this illusion of Maya. And what is interesting is when we look at Shiva and we think about Shiva as the destroyer, Shiva should more technically be called the deconstructor, because Shiva deconstructs your subjective reality, what in Sanskrit would be called Brahmanda, your subjective scaffolding that you've built that you see the world through, right? You live in this little house when all you've got to do is break the walls of this house so you can experience reality as it truly is. And so that's what Maya and Jiva are. So Maya and Jiva are the reason that we misperceive the world. We see the snake in the rope. And Bhagavan used to talk about this all the time, right? He would speak about this all the time to his devotees because they would only see duality while he had an abidance in the Atman. He understood that all is Brahman, and he spoke from that place. And so that's why he was the great Jnani of the 20th century, right? And the problem for each and every one of us is we are so convinced by our subjective reality. We are so convinced about how we measure the world according to our conditioning. We are hypnotized by Jiva and Maya. We fundamentally don't know that Atman is Brahman. Bhagavan knew that, and Bhagavan expressed that to all of his devotees. Now, after Ramana Maharshi's enlightenment, or we could say self-realization at the age of 16, when his name was Venkantaramanaya, right? And after his enlightenment, he hitched all his way to the holy city of Tiruvannamalai in the south of India and resided for the rest of his life at the holy mountain of Arunachala. Bhagavan himself didn't really know what that self-realization was about, right? Like he had it, he threw all his clothes away, he donned a loincloth, and that was it for the rest of his days. He never moved 3 kilometers away from Arunachala, right? And so as he abided in the Atman, he abided at, we could say, the feet of Shiva, because Arunachala is considered a manifestation of Shiva. And so he never really knew what that was about. And so this is where I bring in the Ribhu Gita, right? Because this is one of the texts that explained to Bhagavan his own personal self-realization. And so Ramana states, I did not know that there was an essence or impersonal real underlying everything, and that God and I were both identical with it. Later at Tiruvannamalai, as I listened to the Ribhu Gita and other sacred books, I learnt all this and found that they were analyzing and naming what I had felt intuitively without analysis or name. So the Ribhu Gita itself was the text, and other texts actually were the ones that kind of explained Ramana's own self-realization to him. It kind of made sense, right? He had the concepts, he had the information now that gave him a framework to understand what that was, right? Now, we live in a day and age where a lot of people, particularly New Age people, think that they're above text and they're above everything because, they are the superior people. But for honest, sincere spiritual aspirants like yourself, we don't divert from the text. We seek to understand why Ramana recommended this text, right? Why he taught his devotees, not just the Ribhu Gita, but a lot of other texts in general. And so we should not steer clear of these texts. We should absorb as much of the great text as possible so we can continue to deepen our own self-abidance and cultivate ourselves on the path, right? And so getting back to the Ribhu Gita and getting back to Bhagavan's own self-abidance, right? His abidance in the Atman, which is Brahman, right? So the Ribhu Gita explains like no other how the world is unreal. It does flip-flop. There may be some seemingly contradictions in the text, but we're not going to worry about that today. As I said, we're going to focus on Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. We're going to focus on how Bhagavan himself experienced reality, right? And so I want to just share with you just a few verses from the Ribhu Gita about the world being unreal. Brahman is indeed Brahman, of the form of awareness. The world is full of consciousness, consciousness alone. The whole world is only unreal. The phenomenal world is all unreal. I alone am is indeed unreal. You alone are is indeed unreal. The modes of mind are unreal. Attributes and their absence are unreal indeed. The whole earth is indeed unreal. Water is always unreal indeed. Indeed, the world and sky are unreal. Light is ever unreal indeed. Air is ever unreal indeed. Even all this is only unreal. Ego and intellect are unreal. The hosts of beings in the world are Brahman only. The entire universe is unreal. All attributes are unreal. All the remaining is unreal. All duality is unreal. Other than the self, there is no world. There is nothing of this non-self ever. Any of this other than the self is unreal. There is no doubt that this is the truth. The truth. There is no happiness apart from the self. There is not a whit apart from the self. There is no refuge other than the self. Remain in the self always. There is nothing anywhere apart from the self. Not a blade of grass is apart from the self. There is not even an iota other than the self. Nowhere there is anything apart from the self. So the Ribhu Gita can be very forceful, as you see with some of the verses. It can even be more repetitive as you go further and further in the text. But the reason for that is because it is a nididhyasana text. It is a text on non-dual meditation, meditating on Brahman itself, on your own Atman, which is Brahman. And so everything in those verses, as I just read, is trying to reinforce in your mind that all is the self, the Atman. Everything is that. And Ribhu himself goes through a form of negation of everything in the text, right? As you see, air is unreal, earth is unreal, even our attributes, right? So when he mentions attributes, we're talking about the qualities, the gunas, when you read it in Sanskrit, right? The gunas are our intrinsic qualities. So you have rajas, tamas, and sattva. So if you're rajasic, you're passionate, you're active. If you're tamasic, you're inert, you're kind of lazy, so forth and so on. And if you're sattvic, this is kind of a pure state or a pure guna. And so those are the three gunas. And Ribhu himself even denies those, right? So he's denying your qualities, he's denying the existence of the earth, and he's taking his disciple in the story of the Ribhu Gita, Nadaga, through this process of negation. Now, if you read it properly, Ribhu is not saying that the world or the earth doesn't exist itself, air doesn't exist itself. It's that when we look at it in a dualistic sense, that's when it loses its reality. When we understand it as the self, when we understand it as the Atman, when we understand everything as Brahman, then you gain this type of holistic consciousness. This is what Jiddu Krishnamurti would call the holarchic thinking. So you gain this sense of wholeness, and this becomes your state of consciousness, which is what Bhagavan had, a sense of wholeness, because he understood that all is the Brahman itself. And so that's the importance of reading the Ribhu Gita. And as I said, Ribhu goes through this whole process of negation, and it takes you into a deep non-dual meditation. Obviously, a lot of us can debate and argue with Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, right? Brahman alone is real and the world is an appearance. And some of us would probably resonate more with Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam. But just for today, we'll suspend that, right? And, obviously there are philosophical problems with maybe Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, but we want to stick to this teaching to give Bhagavan's teachings and also his state of consciousness the credit they deserve. So in the Ribhu Gita, Ribhu speaks about a great secret. And so this great secret is going to build on a type of meditation we're going to go through in a few minutes. But this is the great secret of the Ribhu Gita. I shall reveal the great secret that is more confidential than any secret and hard to attain in the world. All is just Brahman alone. Now, that's what we've been speaking about, right? All is just Brahman alone. But Ribhu's taken it to an extreme. This is how a sage functions in the world. All is Brahman alone. That's all that truly exists. This idea of duality, your subjective experience, the way that you subjectively see the world through your conditioning and everything like this is a subjective and a collective trip, right? And so the great secret, according to Ribhu, is that all is just Brahman alone, right? And so I want us to sort of meditate on this secret teaching for just 5 or 6 minutes, right? I'm going to take you through 40 verses of the Ribhu Gita, and I want you to sit back and really listen to this knowledge as Bhagavan would have listened to it from the Swamis in the old days when he first arrived at Arunachala, right? And so I want you to sit back, listen to this chapter. This is chapter 15 of the Ribhu Gita, right? Which goes into the idea that Brahman alone is real. So sit back and enjoy, and let's try and find that place within ourselves, right? Saying trying to find the Atman is kind of silly, right? Because you already are that. So just rest in your being, abide, listen to these words, see if they have resonance within yourself. Brahman alone is all this. Brahman alone is not unreal. Brahman alone is all that is heard. All is indeed Brahman only. Brahman alone is the great mystic design. Brahman alone is the fruit of action. Brahman alone is the great aphorism. All is indeed Brahman only. Brahman alone is the whole world. Brahman alone is the sentient and the insentient. Brahman alone is the supreme and the body. All is indeed Brahman only. Brahman alone is said to be the attributes. Brahman alone is I and the projected light. Brahman alone is the supreme Brahman. All is indeed Brahman only. Brahman alone is this object. Brahman alone is that man too. Whatever little there is Brahman alone. All is indeed Brahman only. Brahman alone is the limitless self. Brahman alone is the transcendental happiness. Brahman alone is the supreme knowledge. All is indeed Brahman only. Brahman alone is the ultimate shore. Brahman alone is the triad of cities, states. Brahman alone is the multiplicity. All is indeed Brahman only. Smell is indeed Brahman only. The supreme transcendence is Brahman only. The sense of smell is indeed Brahman only. All is indeed Brahman only. Touch is indeed Brahman only. Sound is indeed Brahman only. Form is indeed Brahman only. All is indeed Brahman alone. The world is indeed Brahman only. The essence is indeed Brahman only. The mind is indeed Brahman only. All is indeed Brahman only. The world that is ever Brahman, and the word you is indeed Brahman only. The word art is Brahman, as in that thou art. Union with Brahman alone is ever. The secretive is indeed Brahman alone. The exterior is Brahman alone. The eternal is indeed Brahman alone. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is waters are that, the state of the beginning and end of the world. Brahman alone is the beginning and end of the world. All is indeed Brahman alone. Being and non-being are Brahman only. I am only Brahman. There is no doubt of this. Whatever in the least there is Brahman alone. All is indeed Brahman only. Waking state is all Brahman only. I am the supreme Brahman only. Truth and existence are Brahman only. Brahman alone is said to be the fourth state. Being is Brahman, Brahman alone. Regard for the Guru is Brahman alone. The noble attitude of the disciple is Brahman only. Liberation is indeed Brahman alone. The before and the after are Brahman only. The complete and the ancient is Brahman alone. The direct presence is Brahman alone. All is indeed Brahman alone. Being consciousness bliss, Sat Chit Ananda, is Brahman. Brahman is the perfect, the ancient. The direct presence is Brahman alone. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is being consciousness bliss, Brahman alone. Joy is Brahman everywhere manifesting as the adorable. The individual exhibiting auspicious tendencies shines as Shiva always. The individual with sinful traits remains to experience hell. Brahman alone shines as the senses. Brahman alone as the objects, and the activity is only Brahman. All is indeed Brahman alone. All joy is only Brahman. Brahman alone is knowledge personified. The operation of Maya is said to be Brahman only. All is indeed Brahman alone. The process of sacrifice is Brahman alone. The heart space is Brahman alone. The essence of liberation is said to be Brahman only. All is indeed Brahman alone. The pure and the impure are only Brahman. The cause of all this is Brahman alone. The affairs of the earth, Brahman alone. All is indeed Brahman alone. The ever-satisfied self is Brahman alone. All the days are Brahman alone. The silent self of the beings is Brahman only. All is indeed Brahman alone. The essential import of the Vedas is only Brahman. Brahman alone is realized through meditation. The accomplishment of all yogas is said to be Brahman only. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman appears as diverse forms because of the limiting adjuncts. When this is realized as only an illusion, nothing exists by its own virtue. Brahman alone shines as the world. Brahman alone is as the people also. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is forms of the divine. Brahman alone is assembly of sages. Brahman alone is of the form of meditation. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is absolute and relative knowledge. Brahman alone is the Supreme Lord. Brahman alone is the pure enlightened self. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the highest happiness. Brahman alone is the expanding light of consciousness. Brahman alone is the paramount fulfillment. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the form of sacrifice. Brahman alone is the sacred offering. Brahman alone is the self of living being. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the whole world. Brahman alone is the guru and disciple. Brahman alone is all the accomplishments. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is all the mantras. Brahman alone is all the repetition. Brahman alone is all the actions. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is all peacefulness. Brahman alone is the core of heart. Brahman alone is all unitariness. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the abode of truth. Brahman alone am I. There is no doubt of this. Brahman alone is the import of the word that. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the import of the word I, and Brahman alone is the Supreme Lord. Brahman alone is the meaning of the word you. All is indeed Brahman alone. Whatever supreme there is Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the ultimate resort. Brahman alone is objective knowledge. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman is all. There is no doubt of this. Brahman alone are you, the ever auspicious. Brahman alone is this entire world. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is all so attainable. Brahman alone is the self by itself. As Brahman alone is only bliss, all is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is all, only Brahman. Anything apart from Brahman is ever unreal. Brahman alone is only Brahman. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the significance of all utterances. Brahman alone is the supreme state. Brahman alone is truth and untruth too. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the one devoid of beginning and end. Brahman alone is the one, there is no doubt of this. Brahman alone is the bliss of consciousness. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the one eternal happiness. Brahman alone is the soul's support. Brahman alone is the one supreme Brahman. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is consciousness itself and self-abiding. Brahman alone is rid of adjuncts. Brahman alone is the eternal all. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is all that is pure. Brahman alone is the ever easily accomplished. Brahman alone is the truth of truths. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is happiness, verily happiness. Brahman alone am I, the blissful self. Brahman alone is the ever spoken of. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the complete Brahman. Brahman is the one witness of all. Brahman alone is the lavish abode. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the all-round perfect self. Brahman alone is the undiminishing essence. Brahman alone is the root cause. Brahman alone is the refuge. Brahman alone is the self of all beings. Brahman alone is the embodiment of happiness. Brahman alone is the eternally satisfied self. All is indeed Brahman alone. Brahman alone is the self that is non-dual only. Brahman alone is the space-like Lord. Brahman alone is the joy of heart. All is indeed Brahman alone. There is nothing higher than Brahman. Apart from Brahman, there is no world either. Apart from Brahman, I am not I. All is indeed Brahman alone. Other than Brahman, there is no joy. Apart from Brahman, there is no fruit. Apart from Brahman, there is not a blade of grass. All is indeed Brahman alone. Any state apart from Brahman is a myth. Other than Brahman, there is not a trifle. The world apart from Brahman is illusory. All is indeed Brahman alone. The I apart from Brahman is illusory. Brahman alone am I, indeed. Other than Brahman, there is no guru. All is indeed Brahman alone. Any action other than Brahman is unreal. The body apart from Brahman is unreal. Apart from Brahman, there is no mind. All is indeed Brahman alone. The world other than Brahman is a myth. Other than Brahman, there is not a bit. Apart from Brahman, there is no egoity. All is indeed Brahman alone. So as you see in those verses of the Ribhu Gita, Ribhu himself goes into a type of meditation of repetition, which was very common in ancient times, because a lot of the stanzas and the verses, the sutras, were always in a repetitive format. And so that would put you in a state of meditation, right? And so that whole chapter, chapter 15, is this constant meditation that Brahman alone is real, right? And so sometimes people, when they read these texts, they get very bored, right? When they read something like the Ribhu Gita, but it puts you in a state of meditation. It down regulates your jiva, right? And allows you to see the world as Brahman itself instead of misperceiving it through a subjective conditioned perspective. It allows you a moment of time, right, to see the world as it truly is. Most of the time, we are not allowed a single second, right? Particularly in the modern days, because people play with their phones and computers and create artificial busyness for themselves. There's not even a one iota of silence or peace that allows an individual to rest in their being for 1 second. These texts give you the permission to do that, right? They give you the permission to go deeper into your practice, deeper into your state of Atman. Not even a state, right? But English, we can only use certain words to indicate to what that is, right? Your natural Atman, right? And so there are many great verses in there, but the constant theme through that chapter is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, right? Brahman alone is real, the world is an appearance. And so Ribhu is continually driving at that. He's pushing people to abide in the Atman and see the world as it truly is, rather than how we think it actually is, right? And so the last verse, right? The world other than Brahman is a myth. So this goes into this idea of an illusionary world. So we have to think about this in a correct manner, right? And so other than Brahman, there is not a bit. Apart from Brahman, there is no egoity. And so you don't want to mistranslate Maya and say that it's illusion, right? It's the illusion that is built because of measurement. That's a technical way we should translate Maya in English. Often when people go into other cultures and this and that, they see a word on face value and they translate it in that way by using a single word, let's say. But Maya is not one of those words, right? The world other than Brahman is a myth because we measure reality and we create the snake and the rope. That's the problem, right? That's what Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya actually means. And that's the state of consciousness that Bhagavan lived in. He lived in that state where he all he perceived was the rope. He understood that the world as a snake is a myth, right? He understood that even his conditioning as a young man, as Venkanta Raman Iyer, and the way that he saw the world was itself a myth. It wasn't until his own realization that he could see the world in its correct state. And so that is why these sort of scriptures are very important and why we shouldn't shy away from them. Right? What else are you going to do? Watch Netflix, play with your phone, all of these things which don't have any meaning and are just basically occupying your time until the day comes, if you know what I mean, right? So you might as well occupy your time with something that has meaning and that will nourish your soul at a deep level. And that's what these texts actually do. And don't think you're above anything else, right? Don't be like one of those superior New Age people who think they're above the scriptures, or they always say it's too analytical, but they themselves are judging by being too analytical. So if you're humble and you're just willing to learn and just to be as yourself, then you'll continue to learn on the path, right? Listening and learning without judging is a way to move forward. A lot of people say, how did I learn a lot of this when I was younger? I never doubted what was said, because who am I to doubt it? I came afresh to the knowledge. What would a young kid from Mackay, North Queensland, Australia, have to say about the greatest teachings in the world? He's only been around for a certain amount of time. So it's better to listen and learn. And maybe because I didn't have a solid foundation, that's how I absorbed a lot of this knowledge. So if you don't have a solid foundation of who you are and who you think you are, then you can start to listen and learn. And you also won't put yourself in a superior position like people do in New Age spirituality. And so there are so many good chapters in the Ribhu that we went through, right? And the basis of all of it, that Brahman alone is real. I mean, you all pretty much got the picture. And I hope it did put you in a state where you could feel that, right? And like I said earlier, there's reasons why there's such a negation from Reboot and other scriptures, like even in the Ashtavakra Gita and the Avadhuta Gita, even the Mandukya Upanishad Kataka, Ashtavakra, Dattatreya, and Gaudapada and Shankara, they go through a process of negation, of negating the world, right? And it's not, as I said, that the world is illusory per se, but how we see it, right? So that's what the negation is about. It's about continually pulling your awareness away from the gravitational pull of the external world back within yourself so you can see the world in its truest sense. And so that's why there's a continual negation of the world. And a lot of people read this in the wrong way. Oh, so Reboot thinks that I don't exist, that nothing exists, and so forth and so on. You have to understand Maya in its proper context. He's not saying that you don't exist, like literally. He's giving you a roadmap to understand that Atman is Brahman. So he's going through a process of negation. You're even negating the idea of your body and your own mind so that you come back into that clear state of perception, that clear state of awareness, that non-dual state that you fundamentally are. And so then you can move forward and go forward on your life without encountering any obstacles. And so that's what this process is about. And there's so many great chapters and verses in the Reboot Gita. It's a continual meditation. Some of my greatest experiences with such a text has been living in Tiruvannamalai at the foot of Arunachala and just sitting around and reading this. And this is before social media, before people were always on the screens, right? And so those memories are very vivid that I have. And so everything, even in this text, the negation is of even the idea of the self and the non-self, right? So again, Reboot is saying get out of even a conceptual framework in a sense for a second, right? Get out of conceptual sense for a second. And then you'll come back into the heart of being. And so Brahman alone shines as the world. Brahman alone is as the people also. Brahman alone shines as the form. All is indeed Brahman alone. And so this way of thinking, this holistic way of thinking, what Jiddu Krishnamurti said, holarchic thinking, is our natural state of consciousness. Jiddu Krishnamurti actually went into a deep dive into this idea where he talks about how the sense of I is limited, right? Because everything is framed through a subjective perspective, which itself is limited. The ego is limited. Your subjective view of the world is limited because everything is framed through your conditioning. Because we live like that, we find security in division. We find security in the tribe. We find security in the in-group, so to speak. We don't want to be a yogi or a sadhu and, go beyond the pale of society. But Jiddu was mentioning this because real security itself is not in division. It's in understanding who you truly are, right? Division itself is fundamentally insecure. So when we see the world from a limited perspective, because the I, remember the I, the me, the mind is limited. The holarchic thinking is what is true, right? Brahman alone shines as the world. Can we perceive that, right? That Brahman alone shines as the world. And so it's about a state of perception, right? It's about an evolved state of perception, which I speak about actually in my book, The Science and Practice of Humility. The evolution of perception. I talk about two primary states in my book, The Science and Practice of Humility, the warrior and the sage. And basically most of us are the warrior because we're living life through the subjective perspective and we're caught in the chaos, right? We are caught in the chaos and we can't see the world from above, which is the sage's state of perception, right? They can see order in what we think is chaos. And that's again, seeing Brahman in everything.